And the title of this talk is Guilford, Torrance, and Creative Self-Efficacy. So whoever could have guessed that two servicemen in the United States military in World War II would together give birth to this field of creativity and innovation that brings us all together? Seems a bit unlikely, doesn't it? After all, they weren't so-called creative types, they weren't artistic, they weren't even necessarily ideators. They were soldiers, they were airmen, following orders in a very hierarchical organization. And yet, look what they founded. Guilford was a lieutenant colonel who was given the task to find out why so many of the young recruits failed so dismally to complete their training. Could he figure out the correlates for success so that the Army could more effectively train the right people to succeed? His test of the different intelligences inherent in candidates effectively found the candidates who became high-performing recruits. Dr. E. Paul Torrance was an Air Force trainer of pilots during the war, men he lovingly referred to as his wild colts. The military tasked Torrance with finding out, why did some pilots survive in captivity behind enemy lines while others succumbed and died? What was the critical difference for survival? His conclusion: creativity. Together, the findings of these two military men offer us a blueprint for what it takes to survive and to thrive, whether in war or in today's world in total disruption. We must harness each of our unique thinking profiles, appreciating the factors that have shaped our own individual intelligences. And we must combine this with a commitment to the absolute importance of our creative mindset. These are the lessons from these two men in the fight to survive a war. So now it's 70 years later since J.P. Guilford delivered his call to arms to the APA psychologists to accelerate research on creativity. 70 years later, in 2020, does anyone here not feel that we are in a different kind of global war? Are the stakes any less high? It is a new fight for survival. And I contend that in these new times that we're in, the work of Guilford and Torrance points the way forward. You need only look at how we're choosing to meet to protect our own survival. Only innovative solutions will guide us beyond this epic disruption we're living right now. There is a term that was coined in the military in the last 20 years to describe this experience, this fog of war, they called it. It also perfectly captures our current global dislocation, I believe. VUCA. It stands for a reality that is volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex, and it's ambiguous. VUCA. This is where we find ourselves today. And I defy anyone here in this Zoom call not to know what I'm talking about. In this talk, I want to address how these two titans of the field of creativity, Guilford and Torrance, have taken on new relevance today and offer us the keys to our survival once again. Even before the COVID upheaval of 2020, our world was already hurtling forward at a speed beyond where yesterday's skills and education could keep up. The struggle to contend with the new knowledge and technology and change was reflected in the 2018 World Economic Forum report. The new imperative would be for innovative solutions that only creativity could supply. Now, creativity had jumped to the #3 position of most sought after qualities to foster in companies and in new hires. I'll also suggest that #1 was complex problem solving, and if that's not part of creativity, I need to take my master's again. As Dr. Torrance concluded, creativity is a survival skill. Take a look at this graph, designed by the visionary thought leader and transformational consultant to top corporations and organizations worldwide, Keith Yamashita, co-founder of SY Partners. Since April, he has launched a web program called This Human Moment to look deeply at our new world experience right now. Only through awareness and accountability can we hope to find creative action. Can we hope to find our way out of trauma where we live now and find our way not to some post-traumatic stress disorder future, but to find creative renewal. It's a time when it is essential that each of us and our leaders approach our precarious future with the 11 qualities of creative people identified in the Reisman Diagnostic Creativity Assessment. They are originality, fluency, flexibility, elaboration, tolerance of ambiguity, resistance to premature closure, divergent thinking, convergent thinking, risk-taking, intrinsic motivation, and extrinsic motivation. You'll note that the all-important concept of divergent and convergent thinking was, of course, started or discussed originally by J.P. Guilford. How else are we going to find our way through this current reality? And here is where our work has never been more needed. If I was trying to launch a space rocket to the moon, I would call the proverbial rocket scientist, right? Well, if we're trying to find our way past societal upheaval and worldwide disruption into an innovative and newly aligned future, I would call on creativity experts to facilitate that process and discussion. That's you. That's us. 70 years later, this is the moment that all of our research into the science of creativity has been preparing us for, to facilitate and help guide what comes next. It's why undergraduate colleges are increasingly building their creativity programs. You can only build tomorrow's agile workforce, ready to pivot in a moment, by teaching the skills and the mindset of creativity, teaching the survival skills of creativity. We have seen too clearly in some countries that the response to COVID has a high price when it's run by small-minded, fearful, self-interested, non-inclusive ways of thinking. The very opposite of those 11 creative qualities. The results can be fatal. The opposite is the lessons of our field of creative study to know that openness and collaboration produce possibilities none of us could have seen before. To quote Tom Kelly of IDEO, collaboration at its best is exchanging ideas with a group of people who trust one another without fear of judgment or failure. You can feel the electricity. Your ideas spur one another's. The results might have been challenging for you to develop by yourself, or probably would have taken longer. And coming up with them certainly wouldn't have been as much fun. Remember, fun and playfulness are part of the creative game. Guilford showed us that there are many ways that we are each creative. We come with our own unique creative style preference. we can exercise and train even greater creative capacity and collaborative skills. This is how we will build our lifeboats. Remember, it was a creative collaboration that repaired a doomed spaceship and brought Apollo 13 safely back to Earth. We are just in a bigger capsule right now. And when we return to Earth, it also may look very different. So combining the lasting lessons of Guilford and Torrance, I see actionable steps for a sustainable, unforeseeable future. Consider this. Guilford's structure of intellect model was an ambitious and tedious dissection of the different ways we each put together our cognitive view of the world. He formulated 180 different approaches. Though this intricate model has been largely debunked, his approach that recognizes each person's intellectual uniqueness is rock solid. There is no monolithic way to see, to create, or to learn. Any two people will be different, and that difference should be acknowledged and celebrated for what it may offer us. Thank goodness our brains and our preferences are all different, because we know it is diversity that is the fertilizer that makes idea seeds grow into beanstalks. We need to each own our individual proclivities and perspectives. Recognizing that we each see through different lenses is the legacy of J.P. Guilford's work. Torrance, we'll see, was right there cheerleading every child to recognize their own lenses and see their uniqueness. Others' work in the field further broke the conformist molds of the time. Howard Gardner offered his theory of multiple intelligences, that each of us favor one of more of these natural intelligences: verbal linguistic, mathematical, visual spatial, bodily kinesthetic, interpersonal, naturalistic, or musical, with a possible ninth intelligence as existential intuitive. Perhaps this explains why rows of desks facing towards a lecturing teacher in schools didn't work for all of us. In our current societal upheaval, haven't we come to a new awareness that our differences are our strengths? We are moving into awareness, acceptance, and celebration of our uniqueness, because the lack of conformity is critical to our creative capacity individually, collaboratively, and as a species. Enter Dr. Paul Torrance, Paul Torrance, and his Manifesto for Children. A maverick in his time, Dr. Torrance urged children to fall in love with something that each child should know, understand, take pride in, and develop your greatest strength. Find a great teacher or mentor. Do what you love and do it well. Free yourself to play your own game. Forget about being well-rounded, but learn the skills of interdependence and collaboration. For a creative future, Dr. Torrance recognized that schools need to nurture this kind of individuality. Are we willing, in these times where the old normal is gone forever, don't fool yourself, to build an army of diverse individuals who will be prepared to innovate and navigate our unknowable future? I have my own definition of innovation: an adaptive response to a changed reality. That's all. Forget the muse, forget the epiphanies, forget all the other stuff. It's simply an adaptive response to a changed reality, such as when COVID takes over your planet. If we can build this capacity in each of us, then we are acting as Dr. Torrance advised us. By teaching this, we are building each person's most essential belief to live a creative life. Their creative self-efficacy. If you don't know that you're creative, and you don't know how you are creative, you won't participate in helping to solve our problems. Even more destructive, if you feel uncreative and left out of that party, you will thwart change and fight for the status quo. I'm sure we can all think of certain leaders who are like that. Tom Kelly of IDEO put it this way: belief in your creative capacity lies at the heart of innovation. So then, if we want innovation, then having everyone in our organization believe in their own creative capacity is absolutely essential. Great. How do we do that? Again, I'll credit Guilford as being the father of exploring the ways we are all different and uniquely important to the collaborative creative process. Here are some models that help us see ourselves and our people's creative specialties differently. Tom Kelly of IDEO wrote the book, The 10 Faces of Innovation. Many of you are familiar with. He talked of the learning personas and the organizing personas and the building personas. You'll want to have as many of these creative types at your next creative problem-solving session as possible. Dr. Gerard Puccio of Buffalo State developed the foresight thinking profiles based on the 4 stages of the creative problem-solving model. Individuals seem to have a preference for one or more of what they like to do in the creative process. Clarifiers, ideators, developers, and implementers. We need them all. Best and most important, we need to know who we are so we can see who we're not and what we need to bring on board for best collaborative results. The takeaway from this: in an interdependent world, an organization, a team, a classroom, we are best when we all know how we are best. Well, there's a new kid on the block, on the assessment block. Adobe's Creative Types online assessment, one of my favorites. The fact that it is free means that the conversations about how creativity belongs to each of us are boosting the creative self-efficacy of people everywhere. This assessment describes people as one of 8 types: the dreamer, the maker, the visionary, the thinker, artist, adventurer, the innovator, and the producer. You'll also discover in your printout who your real ideal collaborator is. This is how we boost our world's creative capacity, by understanding our own. Remember, Kelly's message that belief in your creative capacity lives at the very heart of innovation. As Dr. Torrance advocated, let's leave no child's unique creative contribution unsupported. In conclusion, our societies are fighting this war for our health, for inclusivity, for greater equality, for expression and celebration of our differences. The time is now. That's what 70 years of research on creativity teaches us is needed to keep our innovative capacity strong. In these chaotic, unsure times, Keith Yamashita encourages us to find our moral imagination to create a new and a better world. Creativity is where it starts. It's beginning. Its time is here. Tick, tock. Can you hear it? There's a movement of diverse, original, nonconformist expression that should give all creative people hope. Let us all lead the way into our ambiguous future to find something better. That is the promise of this field of creativity and innovation that all of us here love. It starts by knowing who we are and how our unique creative collaboration will be a vital part of inventing our next best world. Thank you all for having me today.